Talk to Me is the latest horror movie to be released by A24, and it's safe to say that this felt like a very original, fleshed out approach to a concept that has been somewhat fatigued in Hollywood. Focusing on Mia following the death of her mother, we saw a way of being able to communicate with the dead at the center of this movie. However, when things started going wrong, Mia's life was changed forever. With so many questions left at the end, such as what happened to Riley, what happened with Mia, and what was the meaning of the kangaroo, let's jump into this video and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is Talk to Me ending explained and review. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Oh, and if you enjoy the video, then feel free to hit subscribe. Thanks. Right, I let you in. The ending. The whole premise behind this movie was having individuals being able to communicate with the dead by lighting a candle, holding a hand, saying talk to me, and then when the spirit appeared saying I let you in, which then meant that it took over the body of the human that was holding the hand. The cutoff point was 90 seconds, because if it went on for any longer than that, then it meant that the spirit could have some kind of a hold on the individual, and the connection would not be cut off completely. Plus, the candle also needed to be blown out. And this is exactly what we saw happen with Mia and why she was haunted throughout the entirety of the movie. The first time that she did it, she mentioned that she felt ecstatic afterwards. It gave her a feeling like no other, where she could see and feel everything. However, she went over the cutoff point as her friends weren't able to get the hand off of her in time, meaning that she was now haunted, and that was the main reason as to why she saw a countless number of spirits afterwards. But most importantly, her mother. Or was it? Well, we'll get into that. Following Mia allowing Riley to use the hand after his sister said no, he had a bad reaction to it, which tied back to the line that we heard when Mia first used it when the spirits pointed at him and they said,
"We like you,"
showing us back then that he was never going to get out of this okay. The spirits wanted him. He was younger and wasn't strong enough to be able to handle much time with the spirit inside of him, and we saw this being present when they started hurting him and causing him to hit his face on the table. A scene which was absolutely brutal. That eye moment. God. Whilst in this battered state, we saw that the spirit was still present inside of him, and that was a moment that was hard to look at. All of these spirits essentially feasting upon him and his soul whilst he was taken over, and had a different spirit inside of him in the real world. So it left Mia and Riley's brother Jade to want to try and help him. We heard from Cole and how if Riley left it long enough, then the connection would weaken and the spirits would eventually leave him, as he saw his brother Daniel getting all consumed by it, and ultimately making him hurt himself until he was no more. But Mia didn't want to believe it, and felt that she couldn't wait for that. She thought that by getting him to hold the hand again and blowing out the candle, they'd be able to cut off the connection, and the spirit would leave, as they weren't sure if the door was shut the last time that they did it. However, in that instance, Mia didn't think that it worked. When Mia returned home, we saw the question around what happened to her mother and the question on if she ended things for herself. It was a burning pain that she wanted to know and was festering around in her mind, and it was finally addressed when her father read her a letter from her mother before she died, confirming that she did do that, finally giving her the closure that she needed. No longer would she be an individual who couldn't move on from the grief that was present in her mind. But I feel by then, it was too late. It was when she went into her room she saw the spirit of her mother saying that it was all lies and that she wouldn't do that. I think this confirmed that the spirit was not actually her mother, and that the evil entity was taking the form of her mother in order to try and get her to carry out the evil tasks that it wanted her to do. We saw that they did have the ability to do this, as her father appeared in the form of a spirit in her room shortly after when he wasn't even dead in real life. So it showed that it was never her mother, or at least not towards the end. After wounding her father in reality, after some unfortunate timing and him trying to help her, we saw her go to the hospital with the intention of killing Riley, as the spirit was saying that it was the only way for him to be saved, when in actual fact it wasn't. That would have just allowed Riley to be present with them for eternity, as I feel they may have known that they were losing the connection with Riley. With Mia taking Riley and her seeing the spirit that was embedded within him talking to her, she wheeled him out to a roadside where she was going to push him in front of traffic. However, the movie cut and we saw that Mia had in fact been thrown in front of the road. We saw her get up, walk back to the hospital, and nobody said a word to her. They couldn't hear her, not Jade, not her father, and after looking in the mirror and seeing the nightmare that she mentioned earlier, of looking in a mirror and not being able to see herself, all of the lights gradually went out. until a match was lit and we saw that she walked towards the small light and held a hand, showing that she was in fact dead and now was an individual that would take over human bodies in the real world and no longer be on the receiving end of it. Mia's grief was at the core of this movie, and the uncertainty over what happened to her mother. If she had the closure, then Riley wouldn't have been harmed and there would have been no vulnerability within her for the spirit to latch onto. But there was, and when she was told, it was too late. What happened to Riley? It seemed as though the character Riley was at the point of no return in this movie. However, when we saw that Mia was no longer present in the real world, he was completely healed and looked as though he was back to his normal physical form. Why was this? Well, there are two main things that could support this transformation. The first is exactly what Cole said. As time goes on, the spirits naturally lose the strength of the connection that they hold, and they gradually fade away, so that could well be one logical response. Or the other answer could be that when they went back in for the second time when Riley was in the hospital and they blew out the candle, they could have actually closed the door. With it never being confirmed why it was that he survived and went back to normal, it's something that will most likely forever be left up to interpretation. The meaning of the kangaroo. There was a scene of a kangaroo that was on the roadside in this movie that had a small importance, as it came back to the forefront for a brief moment right at the end when Mia was in her deluded state and was planning on taking out Riley. I think it's very much up for interpretation on what it means, but I think in this movie the kangaroo is symbolic of Mia. We first saw it on the anniversary of her mother's death, and the downtrodden, lonely, in pain and suffering feelings that the kangaroo was feeling was exactly what Mia was experiencing, but in a different context. She wasn't able to move on from the death of her mother due to the unanswered questions that surrounded it, so she wasn't able to rid herself of that pain, hence why we didn't see her put it out of its misery when she had the opportunity to. Because it would continue to suffer, just like how she had been since her mother died and would continue to be for the duration of her life. Overall review. I'm a big fan of this movie. I thought it provided an original take on a concept that we've seen before, the seeing of spirits and being able to communicate with them. The fact that it was positioned as getting some kind of buzz after your body was taken over by them after saying "I let you in," it gave a believable reason as to why people would go back for more and continue to do it again, rather than just being petrified. The sound mixing was really well executed in this movie. There was one moment in particular that stood out right at the beginning of the movie where Mia had the tap running, and when her father was speaking it was inaudible, and then when she turned it off it was crystal clear. It was a very small, inconsequential detail, and it wouldn't have really mattered if it was there or not, but I thought it really captured the tone of the movie and the scene, and showed us that the director wanted us to feel a part of it and not on the sidelines. We were experiencing everything Mia was, and in that moment it really highlighted the distance between herself and her father. In terms of how scary it was, I wouldn't say it was really scary, but I'd say that it was creepy. It wasn't riddled with jump scares, which I was pleased about. It was more about visual horror and allowing things to linger in our minds. The scene where Riley was trying to pick at his eye, that was something that did make me look away for a second, as it looked absolutely brutal. The whole scene in general, plus the opening scene of the movie with the brothers, that was pretty dark and grim as well. I thought the casting was great in this movie. Sophie Wilder's Mia really delivered a phenomenal performance, and when her body was taken over by the different spirits, she had to essentially play different characters, and they were all so believable. I also commend Joe Bird on his chops as well. He had to play two different kinds of Riley, and they were both so different, and one was so much more haunting than the other, so I respect that. The pacing of this movie was exactly spot on. It was only an hour and a half and it didn't feel too short or like it needed to be any longer. We entered the world, got creeped out, and then got kicked out. Exactly how I like my horror movies. Is this the best horror movie of the year? Well, maybe at the moment, as there's not tons for it to compete with. In terms of concept, I'd say it's definitely going to be the best concept of the year. But with the likes of The Nun 2, Saw X, and The Exorcism coming out, it's going to have to fend off some powerful established movies and franchises to retain its spot at the top. I thought this was a quality film, and it was a great way to spend my Friday night. What do you think of this movie? As a bonus, if you also want to see what I rated this movie on Letterboxd, then feel free to follow my Letterboxd profile, leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.